thank you for being with us on Public Process today. I'm your host, Mike Thornton, and we're joined by entrepreneur Adam Goldstein. We're doing a remote interview today at Java Hut here near the fairgrounds. And Adam, thank you for being with us on Public Process.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. And so, I mean, we recently had this Del Norte Economic Summit, and, dare I say, you were like the rock star for everybody. No, it's true. I mean, it seemed like particularly the chamber, many of the elected officials were all very excited that you were here, and then you spoke. And so I guess the first thing that I'd like to get a little bit of a sense of for myself and for the listeners, who is this guy? Where does he come from? What's he about? And why here in Del Norte?
Absolutely. So, I grew up in New Jersey, moved to San Francisco about 9 years ago to start a company called Hipmunk, like chipmunk without the C. And I started it with a friend of mine, and we tried to take the agony out of planning travel. That was our goal. And I'd had a previously failed startup before that, and my co-founder had a previously successful startup. And we wanted to see if we could build something better than the other travel sites out there. And over the course of 7 years, we built it up to a significant size and sold it in 2016. But along the way, I got really into the nuances of the travel industry. And one of the things that I did a lot was I would read about which routes airlines were starting and ending. Where were they creating new flights, where were they canceling flights? And I remember one day sitting in San Francisco, I was reading that United Express was canceling their flight from San Francisco to Crescent City. And I remember thinking to myself, where is Crescent City? This is a place I'd never heard of, none of my friends had heard of it. And it was in California. And I felt like I knew California, but I guess I didn't. So I decided to take one of the last flights on that route. Must have been 5 or 6 years ago. And I absolutely was amazed and impressed with the hiking, the outdoors around here. I thought, this is better hiking than you find in the Bay Area. And there's a tenth as many people, if that. You might go an entire 3-hour hike and see no one else in a world-class hiking area, beautiful weather. And I thought, this is crazy that more people don't know about this. But I figured with that flight ending, fewer and fewer people from the Bay Area would come up here. So I still made it a point to visit. I visited at key turning points during the company's life, during my personal life. I came up probably 3 or 4 times after that. And then after I sold the company, I decided that I would look at buying a place up here. And I looked at it from both a business standpoint, like where could I buy a place that I could rent it out, on Airbnb and sites like that, and also from a personal standpoint, like where's a place that I would enjoy spending time. And I looked at more properties in Crescent City than anywhere else, and ultimately bought a place about a year ago. And since then, I've just gotten to know folks around the area. I think there's an incredible business opportunity up here. It's one of the reasons I bought. I mean, the tourism opportunities here are absolutely world class. The state parks, the national park, Smith River. I mean, it's just I've never seen anywhere else like it. And the fact that it's not already, a huge destination, to me is just a sign that there's a lot of opportunity left to come.
Well, one of the things, and certainly I don't pretend to know as much about the tourism industry as you do, but one of the things that I've often read is that people, particularly younger people, are looking for experiences.
That's right.
And being that this is not a place that is already well known, already kind of on that list of places to go, it falls, I think, somewhat neatly into that new experience category.
100%. Yeah, I said this at the conference. I think the fact that it's not Yosemite is actually a big asset, because it's really, Yosemite is really crowded, and actually with the flight now from Oakland up here, on a Friday afternoon, you can get here in less time from San Francisco than you can get to Yosemite.
Right, absolutely.
And it's really, it's just an amazing confluence of different factors. So I think you're right about the generational shift. The new flight is transforming the tourism opportunities, and the fact that they're adding more flights, I think, is a great vote of confidence in that market. And I hope there's more like that to come.
And I'd like us to talk more about that. But I want to go back to something, and that is, we hear this term entrepreneur, right? what makes an entrepreneur in your opinion? I mean, what does it take to be one?
What does it take to be one? I think the craziness to think you can.
Okay.
I mean, I frequently joke that, and I'm not even joking, I frequently say that if I knew what I now know about the travel industry, there's no way I would have started a travel company. And I hear this from a lot of my friends who are entrepreneurs too. They say, if I knew what I knew about the finance industry, if I knew what I knew about the real estate industry, I never would have started a startup in finance or real estate. Because, you know, that naivety is the thing that gives you the energy to do something that everyone else thinks is impossible.
Right.
People told me it was impossible. They might have been mostly right, but we managed to thread the needle. And I think that's the story for a lot of tech companies.
So I think, you know, it's being able to see the possibility as compared to the limitation, and also perhaps not knowing enough so you can actually think outside of that box that has been built by people around whatever the industry or the subject is.
I think that's right. I mean, there's a couple of things that I think are important kind of patterns in entrepreneurship, which is you can't be too early to the party, or else you won't succeed. You know, if I were looking at Del Norte, let's say, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, I might not have had the same experience. You know, because the flights make such a difference. You know, and the development that's already happened here, and the rise of Airbnb just as a platform, you know, it changes the entire business opportunity. Much like for us, you know, right about the time that we launched was when smartphone apps were starting to become a thing. And we were one of the first travel apps, which made a huge difference. If we'd been 3 years earlier, we wouldn't have had that. So I think timing is a big factor, but also luck. Luck is a huge factor. You know, if I hadn't had the experience of just reading this airline announcement blog, if I hadn't been in that industry, I never would have discovered this place.
Well, you know, luck is an interesting subject because I think there is such a thing as genuine luck, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also a thing that is actually work that has a tendency to look like luck.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways that I've been lucky. You know, I was lucky to be born to a family. Both of my parents are architects, so I grew up around, you know, sort of an intersection between science and art. You know, I was lucky to meet the first guy that ever gave me a job at a book signing when I was 14 years old. I was lucky to meet my co-founder at a conference. I was, you know, just so many of these things. And yeah, some of them was work, some of them's luck, and sometimes it's hard to tease them apart. But this could have been a very different story. You know, instead of being on your radio show, I could be on the radio show for someone in, I don't know, you know, Carmel, California, or something like that.
Well, yes, I mean Carmel, but it would have been a lesser experience.
Absolutely.
Than this.
And it would have been a little more cookie cutter, probably.
I probably would have. Carmel is an interesting place and pretty well cookie cuttered out, for lack of a better term at the moment. So Adam, let me ask you, it really does sound like, and from what I've heard you say, that you kind of have a vision of what all of this looks like.
Yeah.
Realizing that that's your vision. What does it look like to you? What does that tourism development look like to you?
Well, let me say, I wouldn't say it's a fully fleshed out vision.
No, I
it's a
get that.
series of assets. You know, when I look around, I see what are the things that are already creating potential but have the ability to create even more. The airport is huge on that list. I mean, I think it is an incredible blessing for a community that's got as relatively few people as Del Norte County to have an airport that's got runways long enough for jets, that's got you know, instrument landing so they can land even when there's low clouds. I mean, this isn't something that every community has. You know, the commercial service, the subsidies that are available for flights create opportunities for people from the Bay Area, from further beyond there, to discover an area inexpensively. I mean, it's cost competitive with driving, you know, that flight. So I think that's a huge one. Number two is the outdoors, no question. I mean, that should probably be number one. You got the hiking opportunities, the fishing opportunities, the rafting opportunities. It's just where else can you find all those things in such a close proximity? Close proximity to each other, close proximity to accommodations, close proximity to food. I mean, you could go, let's say, 3 hours off road somewhere, and you could probably find all those things. But you wouldn't have cell service, you wouldn't have good restaurants, you wouldn't have accommodations, you wouldn't have an airport, all those things. So finding it all in one place, those all work really nicely together. I also think the leadership. I mean, I've met a number of the local politicians and city and county level. I'm just incredibly impressed because there's a reputation that politicians have, which is that they're just focused on getting reelected, and no doubt, politicians care about being reelected.
That's part of the job.
That's part of the job. But it's also, you can focus, just like if you're the CEO of a company, you can focus on keeping your job and hitting your next quarter, or you can focus on keeping your job and building something that's going to have a permanent impact on the world. And those are two different approaches, and different CEOs approach it differently. The leadership here seems to be focused on building a long-term success for the region, and I think that's amazing because I look at, I know this new flight didn't happen overnight. I know the road improvements have been in the works for decades. It takes consistent focus and leadership, and I think this community has that, and it's great.
We're speaking with entrepreneur Adam Goldstein. You're tuned to KFUG, Crescent City, 101.1 on your FM radio dial, worldwide on the internet, kfugradio.org. I'm your host, Mike Thornton. This is Public Process. All of that sounds great. And this is a community that also is facing many, many challenges about opportunity, equity, isolation, lack of health care. So I guess for me, one of the things is that I try to tend to look at what does it take to build a thriving community, and how does the economy serve and support that, as compared to how do we structure the community to serve the economy. Does that make sense, what
Absolutely,
I'm saying?
And I completely agree.
Can I get you to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of discussion around business and opportunity that makes it in purely financial terms. Right? And I don't think that is an appropriate way to focus. I don't think that money buys happiness. I don't think that the goal should be to maximize the tax revenue of the town or the number of new businesses that open just for the sales tax. I think it's a tool, right? Money can create opportunity for people who don't have it. It can make better opportunities for people who want them. It can create, over time, better infrastructure, better education, better healthcare. And so it's a piece, right? And that's all that I say. I look at it because I come from the travel industry. I see travel opportunity.
Sure.
And I think that travel opportunity is within, certain boundaries is good for both the traveler and the community that they visit. People who visit this area can't help but be impressed and in awe of the beauty, right? And that's a valuable experience for those people to have. I've brought personally 40 or so people up here who've never been before. And all of them are just in awe of the area, and they have meaningful experience in it, and it's a powerful thing, and they come back. But I also think, getting to meet people around here is an opportunity to just hear perspectives from the outside too. I think that the Silicon Valley mindset, it's not the solution to the world's problems, but it's a different way of looking at business opportunities that I think can be valuable for anyone.
When you say the Silicon Valley mindset, what do you mean by that?
I mean the approach of saying, here's a problem, let's figure out the smallest thing we can start with that gets us some progress. And then once we've got that progress, let's see how quickly we can roll it out to the entire world. They call it the lean startup mindset. It's not, okay, I'm going to come up with a 20-page business case, and I'm going to raise a bunch of money, and I'm going to build it because I know it's the right answer. It's saying, I'm actually not sure what the right answer is. Let me try this, and if that doesn't work, let me try something else, and if that doesn't work, I'll try something. And then eventually I'll find something, hopefully, that works. And once it works, I'm going to try to make it as big as quickly as I can. And I look at the businesses that have opened up around here even since I first visited. The brewery, the new restaurant, the new Thai restaurant that opened up, both of which I love. Those people saw an opportunity that no one else had seen before. And I think that those businesses seem to have done really well. are going to continue to do well, and I think others around here will too. And I'm not going to suggest, by the way, that was Silicon Valley that did that, But I think that that being more formal and rigorous about the process of turning a small idea into a huge business, I think that's a valuable, sort of contribution to bring to any community of any kind. But I also think there's downsides that need to be managed, and this is something that I am upfront about with everyone. I don't think this area should turn into Yosemite. I don't think it would be good for the environment. I don't think it would be good for the community to have millions upon millions of people here, driving roughshod over the roads and clogging up the streets with traffic. I think we're a far away from that. I think there's a middle ground that is good for everyone, and I think that's the future that I'd love to see for the community. But it requires thought and it requires trade-offs, and I would not argue with anyone who says that they don't want this to turn into just a suburb of San Francisco. I think there's value to having some local community values as well.
And I think it's really interesting the way you put that, because one of the things, and this is just my observation on a couple of things. Mm-hmm. One is I've been in communities, particularly in the Sierra foothills, mm-hmm. that were former mining and logging communities. When those industries crashed, there was a tremendous amount of poverty and isolation and lack of opportunity. And many of those communities began to look at tourism as the answer. Yeah. And in some ways it was. And it brought with it some downsides.
Yes.
This is also an area that has had a real crash in the economy related to logging yep. and fishing. And I think there's a certain desperation mm-hmm. that underlies a lot of the ambition mm-hmm. that some people in the community have. Does that make sense what I'm
Absolutely.
saying here? And I think that desperation is something that needs to be managed. I mean, it needs to be called out and needs to be managed before, oh my God, tourism will save us all.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that.
No, and I know yeah. you're not. Yeah,
yeah. I think the way that I look at it is any entity, any organization, any group that's looking to grow to some size needs to start somewhere, And this region has already started. It's already got, as I said, great resources. It's got great people. It's got great leadership. It's got shockingly good infrastructure for a community of as small as it is in terms of population.
There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be really surprised when they hear you say that, because there are times when you cannot get here because every yes. road is closed and by landslides.
Let me be clear. When I say infrastructure, I mean sort of social infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
Right? There's a hospital in town.
Yes.
There's a grocery store and a Walmart in town. There's restaurants. There's a health food store. There's an airport. I mean, yeah, no question the roads need to be improved. I'm 100% behind that. But in terms of just being able to live a good life, there's a lot of things that are already here. Again, which is I don't take that for granted, because I've been to lots of small towns across California, across the U.S. that don't have this.
Right.
And don't have anything close to it. And I don't think I've been to any county of as small as Del Norte that has all of those things. Right. So that's a great starting point. Tourism can be another step, and it needs to be managed. There's a certain capacity of the roads. There's a certain number of parking spaces when you get out to Stout Grove. I mean, it's just, you can't have 5 times as many people there. It just won't work. But bringing in more people through tourism can create more economic opportunities for people who live here. It can bring new people in who didn't live here already. More people coming to the community will create more demand for other things. It'll make more demand for healthcare means ideally that there's more healthcare opportunities to be supplied. More demand for different healthy eating options hopefully means there's more healthy food options. More demand for more families moving here, demanding better opportunities for their kids hopefully means even better education opportunities, and so on. So it's not like tourism is going to get the community from where we are today to perfect. It's that it can bring in some additional people, some additional dollars, and then we'll have to figure out what the next step is.
We're speaking with Adam Goldstein, and we're talking about visions for our local economy and how that might actually play out here in our community. This is Public Process. I'm Mike Thornton. So a couple of things. One is I really appreciate the perspective of intentionality.
Yeah.
And once again, I mean, this is maybe an unfair question. I'll ask
No
it.
such thing.
Well, only because it would be understandable for you not to have thought about this much or not to have any answer. Because in addition to everything else that is here in our community, we also have sovereign indigenous tribes here that have their own interests, their own perspective, their own social values, and how a tourism-centered economy may affect them for both good and ill.
Yeah.
Have you had any discussions with anyone about that,
A
or
few.
any thoughts?
It's something I'm interested in discussing more. I think that there's I think when you look at the decisions that various indigenous groups have made to go into the tourism business, either in whole or in part. When I first came up here, that hotel in Klamath wasn't there. Now it's a pretty sizable hotel in the region, and I wonder if it's actually the biggest hotel in the county. It's probably up there, and that's owned by, or at least partially owned by the tribe, as far as I know. And so, I think that the certain indigenous groups already see tourism as an opportunity, and no doubt certain of them also see it as a threat. Increased tourism can bring damage to the environment. It can bring culture change. It can bring, people who don't have the same respect for local traditions, and that means both, the local indigenous people and also non-indigenous people, who have their own beliefs. Those are all, to me, things that need to be considered. But to me, they're not reasons to hold back on growing, the tourism opportunity altogether. It's sort of like, in a city like San Francisco, where I'm from, people have concerns about, how are we going to accommodate the new people who want to live here, and how are we going to deal with the increasing traffic and all those kinds of things. And those are all real problems. But they're not reasons to keep people from living in San Francisco.
Right.
And so that's where I see it as, all of those concerns are valid, and there is a way, I think, to create a tourism strategy that serves the needs of indigenous and non-indigenous people. And I think it would be better to do that and to sort of lean forward and say, this is an opportunity that's for all of us, let's make the best of it, rather than to say, well, we don't know if we want tourism.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I mean, I think the idea, of course, is that making sure that all the voices are at the table, because a lot of times what can happen, of course, is certain voices are at the table. They have perspectives. Doesn't mean anyone's a bad person or any of that, but they have certain perspectives and certain interests.
Yes.
Other people are not at the table. Their perspectives and their interests don't become part of the conversation from the beginning when they need to be.
Yeah. And I don't have a solution for that.
I don't know. I don't necessarily.
Yeah. And that's sort of beyond my area of expertise, but I will say I largely agree. I think that it would be a shame if tourism, grows by 50% here, and it doesn't benefit the indigenous people, and it doesn't benefit the local community, and it only benefits this out-of-towner like me, who bought a place here and rents it on Airbnb. That would just be a real shame. I don't think that's going to happen. Again, the leadership that I see here and the consensus around, hey, this is an opportunity, but we also have to manage it. I hear that pretty much everywhere that I go, talking to people at restaurants, talking to people, at City Hall, and so I think that there's sort of a general alignment that that's the way to run things. Whether that's how it actually plays out, we'll see.
That's right. Well, we don't know that, but it does lead me to ask a couple of other questions. For example, we have Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
Something like 70% of the homes there are second homes.
Yes.
The people who actually live and work there can't afford to live and work there.
Yes.
And in that case, some of the casinos have literally built tent cities for their employees to work.
Yeah.
we have a severe housing shortage, affordable housing shortage
Statewide.
here as well,
Yes.
and it is statewide. And if we wind up going down the road where we have people going, that's a beautiful place for a second home, I'll live there in the summer when it's nice, I'll rent it out as an Airbnb, then we could wind up losing even more of the local housing
Absolutely.
stock.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question, and it's actually sort of state housing policy and local housing policy is an area that I've spent a lot of time involved in. I've actually been actively lobbying for this bill, SB 50, which is up in the state legislature, because I think that as a state, we make it too hard for affordable housing to be built. I think that there's too much resistance. There are arguments that, it's going to change the look of the neighborhood, which it will. But you know what? People need a place to live.
Right.
They can't live on the street.
That's right.
That's more important, right? So that's where I start from. Now, it's a delicate balance here because in order to create those economic opportunities for people to be able to, afford their own homes or apartments or even just rent, there need to be jobs. There need to be jobs. And how can we create those jobs? Well, there's lots of things we can do. We can continue to invest in healthcare in the community, and that's a great kind of job to have. We can continue to invest in infrastructure. We can build, the new, whatever the replacement for the last chance grade will be, which should create lots of jobs, hopefully, whenever it gets built.
And hopefully some of those will be available for people who actually
Hopefully
live here.
so, right? It would be a shame if they weren't. And tourism is another one of those things. Now, I think it's kind of an interesting question, though, because when these discussions about, Airbnbs come up, and I think that they're completely valid, by the way, I think it's interesting to compare those with, arguments about new hotels being built, because you rarely encounter as much opposition to a 50-room hotel being built, where people say, wait, that could be a 50-room apartment or a 50 apartment building. Occasionally, but usually it's the Airbnb that, sort of situation that gets most of the attention. And I think it's just an interesting sort of psychological question. Like, why one home being converted to, or even 50 homes being converted to an Airbnb, have the same impact on housing as a 50-room hotel being built instead of a 50 apartment building? Both of them take 50 homes off the market that could have been used for residents. So
why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? Well, I think because it's one thing to lose what's already there. When there are homes that are already there and they're turned into Airbnbs where people can't live anymore, I think that feels like a loss. And in some sense it is. But it also is a gain in terms of now, that one home which would have housed one family can now accommodate 200 different families visiting the area for the first time over the year. I think the question is, what's the right balance? 100% Airbnbs would be a disaster for the community, right? And it would also make it a less interesting place to visit. It would be self-defeating. But 0% Airbnbs would also be a disaster for the community, right? It would mean that people, during the summer when all the hotels are sold out, that's the limit as to how many people can actually visit this community and the limit of jobs that can come from that. So is the right answer 5%? Is it 20%? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a discussion for the community to have. And I think that, taxing Airbnbs is the right thing to do in this community. And I'm happy to pay my Airbnb taxes. Every time that I see the bill, I'm like, great, this is good for the community. I should be paying these, So maybe the tax rate, needs to be looked at. Maybe the restrictions, maybe really, I think the worst is the people who stay here a few months a year and don't rent it out the rest of the time, right? And cities like Vancouver have put in place extra taxes when homes are completely vacant. Maybe that's something we should look at, But I think looking at it from all those different angles, I understand the emotion when a specific home or when a series of homes are converted. But I think it makes sense to look at what's the ratio that we want. What percentage are we comfortable with? What percentage is too much? And then how do we create policies that encourage, new affordable housing, which can happen at the local or the state level? And then how do we make sure that we don't lose the opportunities for local, people who've lived here or who are just moving here to actually own a home and be part of the community?
We're speaking with entrepreneur Adam Goldstein. We're talking about tourism and economic development here in Del Norte County. This is Public Process. I'm Mike Thornton. Adam, we just have a few minutes left, and I know you've got a meeting that you need to go to, and I've got things I've got to do too. So a couple of things come to mind. One is talking about jobs, and I I hear what you're saying about how tourism can be one aspect of that. That can be a conduit for money that comes in, which can then make other things possible. Because one of the chronic issues in this community, particularly for young people, is I have nowhere to go here, I have no upward mobility, I have nothing to do here, I have to get out of here as quick as I can. And while I'll say it this way, which is hyperbolic, and I know that, I think that a community where the penultimate goal is, oh my gosh, I could be a maid somewhere, or I might be able to be a cook at the fancy restaurant, would be a real loss.
Absolutely.
You know, and I hear that you agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, so how do we, as citizens, as people who are engaged in our community in different ways, ensure that those things don't happen?
Yeah. Well, so the good news here is that a lot of those ways that business were done are changing everywhere. It is now possible to have a job at a really good company that pays, double or triple the average salary in Del Norte County and still live in Del Norte County. There's lots of companies out there that are happy to hire remote employees for really, really good, high-paying jobs. Some of which require training, some of which don't. Some of which require, an undergraduate education or graduate education, and some of which don't. I'll give you an example. When we started HipMonk, this travel company, we hired people in all different places, not just in San Francisco, including in some areas that, where the average salary wasn't quite as low as Del Norte, but still, half as much as the Bay Area. And we were happy to provide those jobs to people there, and they were happy to have them. And they contributed to their community. They were able to afford a home. So, I think that one of the steps here is, and I come back to this flight because it really makes a difference. If you're an ambitious young person in Del Norte County and you want to stay here, it is now practical for you to commute down to the Bay Area for, let's say, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever, and to live up here. And even with that round-trip flight and maybe one night of a hotel in San Francisco, you will still spend maybe a third or a half as much on your cost of living as if you actually moved to San Francisco, right?
$3,600 a month for one bedroom.
Oh, exactly, right? So looking at opportunities in the Bay Area for people who live here to work remotely, but to commute down once a week or once a month or whatever, I think that's one venue or vector of opportunity. And the great thing about that kind of thing is, once people build up some savings, which many of my friends have done in the technology world, then they've got a few months, maybe a year of savings to go and start their own businesses in their own communities. They could start tech companies, they could start non-tech companies. And I mentioned, there's multiple of these companies that I've seen pop up around here that, I think there could be even more. So that's one thing. Second is creating what in Silicon Valley they call network effects, which are, what are the things that draw more people in, that make the community better, that draw even more people in, that make the community better, that draw even more people in. Tourism can help. Local jobs can help, local businesses can help. Flights can help, better infrastructure can help, but all of these things make it a more desirable place to live. And when it's a more desirable place to live, it should also be a more desirable place to work. And I think, in the next 5 or 10 years, it's reasonable for the community to have a goal of bringing in a satellite office for a major company. It could be customer support, it could be sales, it could be engineering, who knows, right? It could be any of or all of these things. But with a cost of living as low as it is in Del Norte County, it would be crazy for companies not to look here as a place to create another office. And, all of these things I think can compound.
Well, and let me ask you this, because as you said that, it made me think of something. What about a kind of a business incubation kind of tech hub that is not necessarily tied to a particular company, but provides the space and infrastructure? I'm thinking particularly about high-speed internet, where people could engage in creating businesses here and then reach out to the broader world.
So I'm going to say I'm somewhat skeptical of starting there.
Okay.
Because I think that what I was saying with network effects, you need to sort of create some inertia, right? So creating one of those incubators or those shared areas in the Bay Area is easy because there's so many people starting companies. You know, in New York City, it's easy because there's lots of people who work at tech companies. In Boston and Austin and Seattle and Portland. But all of those cities had a company that opened an office there first, or a couple companies, or they have a big university there that's churning out graduates. I think it makes sense to start. I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea. I just don't think it's going to be an overnight success. I think it takes multiple of these steps. You know, the fact that this area's got great internet is another asset. The fact that it's got...
Well, not all of it's got great internet.
Fair enough, yes. But the fact that much of it does is a great asset. But it's not, you know, everywhere else in the country also does, or most other places. So that's not going to be what brings people here. Could there be an incubator around tourism technology? Maybe. But again, I think it's going to start with some smaller steps. I think it's going to be bringing in, you know, some satellite offices, improving educational opportunities, making it overall a place that ambitious young people want to stay. Making it a place that ambitious people from elsewhere are open to moving. You know, all of those things take multiple steps. Once you've got a group, you know, that's really got some energy around that and it's starting to grow on its own, then I think, you know, something like that co-working space or that incubator could really make a difference. But until then, I think it might be jumping a little too far ahead.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about Hipmunk. You hit it at the right time.
Yes.
And that's the same premise, I think, with something like this. If you try to do it too soon, won't work. If you wait too long, already done.
Yeah, now look, if someone's willing to open one in their coffee shop, by all means. I'm not suggesting that it's a bad idea.
Right.
I'm just suggesting, in the same way that some people look at tourism as the panacea, some people look at, if we just create this tech space, we're going to have a bunch of startups that are really successful, and it usually doesn't work out that way unless there's also the whole community and the ecosystem. The good news, again, is that we are within commuting distance of the best technology ecosystem in the world right up here, right? With that flight, you can be door to door from, you know, Crescent City, from Hiuchi, from, you know, most of the county, at least most of the easily accessible county. You can be door to door to downtown San Francisco in 3 hours and be there in time for a 9:30 a.m. meeting and be home for dinner. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. So I think that's an opportunity in itself, and we should take advantage of it and say, what can we do to strengthen our ties with this amazing technology center that's 3 hours away?
We're speaking with Adam Goldstein. Adam, we just have a couple of minutes left. So what I'd like to ask you, you were prominently featured at this Del Norte Economic Summit. What role, official or unofficial, are you playing in helping to counsel our local officials and chamber in developing these ideas that you're clearly excited about and certainly have knowledge about?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm not doing anything formally, and I don't particularly want to do anything formally because I don't know as much as the people here do about the way that the community works. I just don't. I've owned a house here for about a year, and I've probably spent cumulatively a total across my whole life of a month and a half here. I mean, that just doesn't compare to people who've spent their whole lives here. Do I think that I have a perspective that can be a useful contribution? Yeah, but I don't have the answers. I just have ideas, and it's going to be up to the local community to say, yeah, that idea sounds interesting, and if they want my help with it, sure. Or they might say, you know, that's a terrible idea. I say, okay, you know better. I mean, you live here. And so that's my approach. I'm talking to people. I'm exchanging ideas. I'm always happy to chat with folks like you and just get the fact that I'm interested in the area out there. And if people have ideas or they want my ideas, I'm happy to share them. But I'm not going to force them down anyone's throat.
Any final thoughts for our audience today?
You know, I would just the final thought that I share, and it's similar to what I shared at that summit, is I think when I talk to folks around here about what impresses me about the area, about the people, and about the community and the leadership, it surprises me that other people aren't talking the same way. Now, it might be that I'm totally missing something, you know, but I think that there's a lot of the time when I hear people talk about things, they talk a lot about the issues, the people being, you know, left behind. I'm not ignoring that at all. What I see here, though, is huge opportunity. And I think that opportunity can be good for everyone. And I think it should be good for everyone, and it needs to be done in such a way that it's good for everyone. But I could have decided to invest anywhere in California or even elsewhere, and I've only bought one house in my entire life. I don't own a house in San Francisco. I don't own an apartment there. I bought a house in Del Norte County because I've spent 9 years in the travel industry, and I think this area is poised to do extremely well. So I just share that because I think talking to some folks here, getting that sort of excitement can brighten their day, and it's genuine. I put my money where my mouth is. I bought a piece of land up here recently too. Like, I think that this area is poised to be really, really successful. And I hope that I can convey that message, and I hope that other people share it, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help.
Adam Goldstein, thank you so much for being with us on KFUG's Public Process. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.